Prime Minister, 6 months ago you came here, you impressed everybody with your reform agenda, even me. I said if you achieved your goals, I would support you. Economic reform was the cry. And within a couple of weeks, the Commission had proposed to scrap 68 new laws. I thought, crikey, perhaps Blair's going to do it. Perhaps he really is going to reform and change. But no, under your presidency, there have been 3,350 new legislative acts. Total failure on economic reform. On the CAP, you said you'd work to achieve a consensus for reform. Well, in a way you have, I suppose, because you've got 24 countries against you. No CAP reform until 2014. On the budget, you said there'd be no surrender of the UK rebate. Well, it seems to me that you've given away £7 billion of British taxpayers' money for nothing in return. Your only achievement is to open talks with Turkey, which is opposed by the vast majority of people in Europe and will lead to an even higher bill. Why should British taxpayers pay for new sewers in Budapest, for a new underground system in Warsaw, when our own public services are crumbling in London? Why should we pay a penny piece into an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for the last 11 years in a row? This budget deal is game, set and match to President Chirac. No cheese-eating surrender monkey he. Unlike you, he stands up for the French national interest, not some bizarre notion of Europe, and he has outclassed and outplayed you at every turn. Your only real achievement is that Britain is now isolated, alienated. We are completely alone within the European Union, which is why it's been said before. Hang on a second. Everybody else gets an extra minute, Mr. President. I'm asking for 10 seconds. Thank you. Which is why, Prime Minister, I urge you. It's often been said that you wanted to be the permanent President of Europe. Please stay on for a further 6 months, 6 more months of the British presidency, and they'll kick us out. Thank you.
Mr. President, when the Prime Minister came to Strasbourg in October, I told him he had come to survey the shattered wreckage of his European dreams. Little did I realise then quite how comprehensive that wreckage would be. It is bad enough that he has failed to deliver the ambitious reforms which he promised in June. But as a British Conservative, I am appalled by the way he has failed our country and failed my East Midlands constituents. Early this year, Prime Minister, you boasted that the British rebate was not on the table, period. Then you put it on the table, and you boasted that you were the first Prime Minister to do so, but only in exchange for radical reform of the budget and the CAP. Now you are selling it in salami slices with nothing in return but fool's gold and vacuous promises. No wonder that Gordon Brown has said, "No one believes a word you say anymore." Britain's favourite newspaper, The Sun, says Tony Blair is to surrender billions of pounds of taxpayers' cash and get nothing in return. In its editorial of December the 1st, it said, "This is treachery." Treachery, Prime Minister. Not a nice word. Not my word, The Sun's word. But I and millions of Sun readers agree. You are giving away a huge sum of money simply as a fig leaf for your failure. But it is not your money, it is not the government's money, it is our money, it is the taxpayers' money. They tell me, Prime Minister, they tell me that you are concerned about your legacy. I can tell you what your legacy will be. You will be remembered as the man who squandered Margaret Thatcher's legacy.
There are, in my experience in politics, there are 3 groups of people. There's, first of all, the reactionaries. Let me just tell you, sir, and your colleagues, you sit with our country's flag, you do not represent our country's interests. This is the year 2005. This is the year 2005, not 1945. We're not fighting each other anymore. These are our partners, they're our colleagues, and our future lies in Europe. And when you and your colleagues say, what do we get in return for what we contribute to enlargement? I tell you what we get. We get a Europe that is unified after years of dictatorship in the East. We get economic development in countries who we have championed. We get a future reform that allows us, once and for all, to put an end to discussion about rebates, common agricultural policy, and get a proper reform budget for Europe. That's what we get if we have the vision to seize that opportunity. The second group. No, I'm afraid they're not a group I've ever come across in politics. The second group, with the greatest respect to one or two of my colleagues who spoke at the beginning, are the commentators. The people who, as I think you, sir, said, we shouldn't worry about our national perspectives, but just think about Europe when we come to negotiate the budget. Look, let's get a little bit of reality into this. Not only. Well, I'm glad you add in the not only, because when you're the leader of a national country and you come to a European negotiation, it is inevitable, honestly, that people are going to argue for their national interests. The great challenge of Europe, and actually its great achievement, is that despite people naturally and rightly arguing for their national interests, they nonetheless can come to a collective agreement. And look, I am well aware of the fact that the budget deal that we have secured in the early hours of Saturday morning is not the right budget deal for the future of Europe. That's my case. It isn't. But what it does do is allow us, in the meantime, before we get that fundamental reform that we want to see, to settle the budget in a way that allows the new countries coming into Europe to have some certainty about the forward financial perspective. If they don't have that, then we may make our points to each other in this Parliament or in the Council, but they, meantime, suffer. And I happen to think that when we put that extra money into Eastern and Central Europe, it's not a cost to us, it's an investment in our collective future. I genuinely believe that. And I think that if you look at what will happen in the future, as those countries grow, some of them are already talking within a few years of becoming net contributors to the European budget. It's a fantastic thing for them even to contemplate, never mind achieve. But we need to give them that budget certainty now. Now, many people have talked about my speech in June. Let me go back to what I said in June. What I said in June was this, that we had to have a fundamental reform, not just of the budget, but of the way Europe adopted its policy and carried it through. In the meantime, I said, we had to try to get a financing deal. Now, I think of this in two stages. The first is to get the budget deal that allows people the certainty that at least Europe can move forward rather than keeping on arguing about the budget. And I know it's not ideal, but it is the best we can do at the moment, in my judgment, until we then move at 2008 to a process that allows us that fundamental reform. Now, I think if I was to do a hands up in here who wants fundamental reform of the European budget, we probably have a majority of people. I think that's true. Most people now understand we need a reformed budget and that it's not just about the rebate or the common agricultural policy, but from the beginning. What is it that we want to spend? How do we spend it? On what do we spend it? How do we make sure people pay according to their wealth and receive according to their need? Now, that would be a sensible budget to have. We don't have that at the moment, but we've now got a process that allows us to get there. So if I can say to the commentating class, I understand why people say, I'm sorry that Graham's left his seat. He said that I had a hard time with the British media. Well, thanks for helping. The trouble about the commentating class is that when they say that we're actually on your side with a pro-European case, they prefer to make the criticisms that actually get out there and take on the sceptic media themselves. I've got to do that, but I don't mind doing it, as long as people understand that whenever you're engaged in any piece of politics, it's not commentating the end that does it, it's doing that does it. And that takes me to, we will do it, thank you. That takes me to the points that were made both by Hans Gert and by a colleague from the Green Party. I mean, of course, we will work closely with you in trying to develop that reform. And I agree with you, for example, in things like justice and home affairs and common and foreign security policy, we do need to be able to do more. But as I say, let's hope then, over the next few years, we can see our pathway to doing it. I would just say to our colleague from the Green Party, you know, it's not just hot air on development and climate change. I mean, my country, Britain, has trebled its aid to Africa. The European Union as a whole has now agreed to double its aid budget to Africa. That's a pretty big step forward. And on climate change, again, I know why all the problems have, you know, arisen and why people say, well, you're not making as much progress as you should. But let's not knock it. We got an agreement in Montreal. And that agreement at least helps pave the way for a fundamental framework which will involve not just the countries currently involved in Kyoto, but also America and China and India, and that's important for the future. And that brings me really to the very final point I want to make just at this stage, which is just to say this to colleagues. There's a lot of talk about how we, you know, what people in Europe, and I think our communist friend said, you know, what is the issue in relation to the citizens of Europe and how they feel about Europe. Look, the citizens of Europe basically want Europe to address the problems that they know can only be addressed by collective action at a supranational level. That's what they believe about Europe. And therefore they know that you cannot get a single economic space without European action. They know that that should have a social dimension. They know too that on things like terrorism and migration and the environment, you need Europe acting together. And you can see today in Bosnia, in Indonesia, in other places, how common and foreign security policy can actually inure to the benefit of the citizens of Europe. My point is very simple. None of this could be argued for or taken out on the streets of Europe unless we'd resolved the budget deal. So let's be very clear. This is not the ideal budget, but it's the best that can be done now, or very nearly the best that can be done now. Then let us all together, Commission, Council, Member States, European Parliament, work out how in the next few years we can build the consensus for a changed and reformed Europe in which the budget is a rational part of that future, not an unfortunate piece of horse trading on the basis of the way the budget has grown up over the years in the past. Now, we can do that if we have the political will to do it, but it won't be done with the greatest respect by reactionaries or by commentators. It will be done by doers. Thank you.